Alright, hey guys, this is May 4th, Monday for geometry. So what we are on section 4. It begins on page 601. So on page 601, they give you some other trigonomic identities. So remember I told you that we mainly had sine, cosine, and tangent, but then there were also reciprocals of those as well. And so these are going to be the reciprocal functions. We have cosecant, which is 1 over sine. Then we have secant, which is 1 over cosine, and then we have cotangent, which is 1 over tangent. And so all that happens here is basically it's the reciprocal of sine, cosine, and tangent. And so the big thing to remember so you don't get confused, because some people do, it's cosecant goes with sine, so cosecant goes with sine, and then secant goes with cosine. And so some people try to put the cos together, but that's wrong. It's cosecant goes with sine, and then secant goes with cosine. And so you just have to have those down, but it's just the reciprocals of sine, cosine, and tangent. Theorem 14.3 on page 601 tells you have the sum of squares identity, and the sum of squares identity says that for any angle x, sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x equals 1. And so sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. And so what we're going to do today is trigonomic identities, and basically these are going to work kind of like a puzzle. So you're going to have to kind of fit it together, use all that we know with our cosine, sines, and tangents, and then your cosecants, secants, and cotangents, and you're going to kind of work it together like a puzzle. And so the first one I'm going to do is going to be actually example 2 on page 602. So this is actually example 2, then we'll jump into some of y'all's. And so they give us sine x plus secant x, and basically I want that to equal tan of x is what I'm trying to get to. And so what you're going to do is you're going to basically work the left side until you can get down to tan of x. And so you're just going to start substituting and plugging in things that you know so that you can kind of work that through. And so sine of x plus secant of x, what happens here is the sine of x I'm going to leave, it's pretty the basic one. But secant of x, I'm going to actually substitute in my 1 over cosine of x. And so I'm going to work this one down. And so I have sine of x. For the secant of x, it's the reciprocal of it's 1 over cosine is how I can substitute that in. And so I'm going to substitute in 1 over cosine of x equals tangent of x. And then when I work it through here, when I multiply the top sine of x times 1, I end up with sine of x. And then when I multiply, the denominator just stays the same, so I have sine of x over cosine of x. Now, if you look down on page, where are we at? If you look at example 1 on page 602, they give you the proof for why sine of x over cosine of x is going to be tangent. Because basically when you plug in the things of the triangle, you're going to wind up with a over b, because the c's are going to cancel. It'd be a over c divided by b over c. And so then you're going to multiply by the reciprocal, the c's will cancel, and it will just leave you a over b. And so that's going to be another shortcut you need to remember. So we need to remember that sine of x over cosine of x is going to equal tangent of x. And so the proof is just right here that I just did. So basically you use example 1 to understand that sine of x and cosine of x equals tangent of x. And so that is going to work down on this one, and so we're good at that point. So that'll tell you that tangent of x equals tangent of x, because sine of x over cosine of x is tangent of x. And so example 1 gives you the proof for this, and then example 2, they basically worked through using that information. And so that is basically going to be what we're going to do for all of them. You're just going to have to work one side of the equation until you can get the other side and just plug stuff in. And so your homework is going to be 1 through 20 or 1 through 19. What was it? It was 1 through 20 on page 403 on 603. So I'm going to work a couple of these with you, and so I will do I'll do number 4. So I'll do number 4. So 4 says secant of x, cotangent of x. This is 4. It says secant of x times cotangent of x equals cosecant of x. Okay, so that's the problem. So basically I want to work either the left or right until I can get them to match. And so the first thing I have to do is just basically look at what I have right here and say, okay, what is it that I can plug in for each of these? So what can I plug in for each of them? Well, I know that my secant of x can really be written as 1 over secant of x over here is 1 over cosine. So I can plug in 1 over cosine for this. Alright, so that's the first step. Now I'm looking at cotangent. Cotangent, you can kind of think of it a couple different ways. You can look at it as 1 over the tangent right here, or you can look at it as cosine over sine, because remember, if sine over cosine was tangent and the reciprocal of tangent is cotangent, then cotangent could also be the cosine over sine, so you just flip that fraction. So you can think about it either way there. The first one we're going to do here is just do it as 1 over tangent of x, which then you could put as 1 over cosine, 1 over sine over cosine, because the tangent of x is, again, tangent of x is going to be sine over cosine. So then this is where it flips, and so when we multiply by the cosine of x to get it out of the bottom, basically just showing you the process. So when I multiply by cosine of x to get it out of the bottom, then it cancels here on the bottom, and then it leaves you with it up top. And so you wind up with cosine of x over sine of x, and then times 1 over cosine of x. And so notice there, all I'm doing is working it down, and so you end up with basically 1 over cosine of x and then cosine of x over sine of x. So what I would do once you understand what happens is you can kind of skip this entire middle step. Instead of doing 1 over tangent of x, especially if you see a cosine already worked in the problem, you can go ahead and skip down right to this where it's cosine of x over sine of x, because cotangent is going to be cosine over sine, whereas tangent is sine over cosine. So that's the work of how it flips, but I would basically just skip from this step to this step once you understand that, because there's really no need to do the middle step if you understand where it goes to. And so we can go ahead and write that if you want. So another rule is cosine of x over sine of x equals cotangent of x. That's just another one you can remember. It basically flips. Okay, so now looking at what I have, basically I have 1 over cosine and then cosine over sine. So then I can look to see what cancels. So what cancels is the cosines are going to cancel, and that'll leave me 1 over sine of x. So 1 over sine of x then would equal cosecant of x. So then just think about what was cosecant of x. Cosecant of x was 1 over sine. And so then notice you're just going to end up with 1 over sine of x equals 1 over sine of x. And so that would be your answer. That would basically prove it. And so basically you can get down to this step right here and you're good. This right here would actually be your answer. And that right step right there is your answer, because when we plugged in, we got the same thing. And so that proves that 1 over sine of x equals cosecant of x. And so that's really all you're going to be doing. You're going to be basically working the left until you can get to the right. Or sometimes you may have things on both sides of the equation that you have to kind of work down until you get the same thing. But that's essentially all you have to do. Again, this problem right here allowed us to see that cosine of x over sine of x was cotangent of x. So again, this middle step from now on I would actually just skip, Because if I know this rule right here, then you can basically just plug in, instead of doing 1 over tangent of x for cotangent, you could have just put cosine over sine, and then immediately your cosines will cancel. And so you just get straight down from that step down to your answer. And so once you kind of get the rule down, you can kind of skip those algebra steps because it'll work the same way every time. And so that is number 4. I'll do another one just to make sure we kind of got it. I'll do number 6. So 6 was cosecant x times cosine of x, cosine squared of x, plus sine x equals cosecant x. Okay, so basically I want to plug in so what I'm going to have to do is I'm just going to work this left side to see if I can get down to the right side. And so the first thing is the cosecant of x, I want to plug into the 1 over sine. So cosecant of x is 1 over sine. So cosecant of x, I want to change this to 1 over sine of x. Okay, so that's your first step, is just to work it down, substitute in what you need to substitute into. Alright, the next thing, I'm just going to leave this cosine squared of x alone, because I can't really do anything with it. So I'm going to leave the cosine squared of x alone, which is just right there, plus sine of x, okay, I'm going to leave it alone for right now as well. Okay, so now look at it. What do I have going on? Well, I have this 1 over sine of x times a cosine of x. And what do I want to do with that to kind of help bring this together? Well, to bring it together, basically I'm going to need a common denominator. Because basically what happens is this is multiplied together, so it's basically cosine squared of x over sine of x plus sine of x. And so I need a common denominator. So what will be my common denominator for these two parts? That would be a sine of x. And so, since my common denominator is sine of x, that means I have to get a common denominator that I can add them together. It would be the same thing as if my denominator was a 2, then I would need to make this one a denominator of 2 so that I could add the numerators together. It's just now we're dealing with sine. And so I'm going to multiply this one by sine of x so that I can get the common denominator. So if I put my common denominator, that means I did it on the bottom, so I then must do it to the top as well. And so that is what's going to help us clean this up. And so that would give me cosine squared of x over sine of x plus sine squared of x over sine of x. So again, all I've done so far is I plugged in my 1 over sine for cosecant. Then I said, okay, I have to get a common denominator, so my denominator was a sine. So that means on my other side, I have to make the denominator a sine, which means if I do that to the denominator, I must do that to the numerator as well to keep it balanced. And so sine times sine is sine squared. So now I have cosine squared of x plus sine squared of x. Okay, so now I can kind of look at that. What's my rule for sine squared plus cosine squared? Well, sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. So that means I can substitute in sine squared plus cosine squared plus sine squared is just 1. So I wind up with 1 over sine of x. Okay, remember I'm trying to get to a cosecant of x. And so 1 over sine of x is going to be cosecant of x. And so you're done. That checks it right there because cosecant of x is going to be 1 over sine. And so these are the same thing. So that would be your answer right there once we got down to that step. So basically you're just showing all your work. The problem is showing the work about how you get from the left to the right. And so all of this would be your answer showing it how we got down to this. So that's pretty much all you're doing. You're working the left until you get to the right. You have to remember that all the stuff on the left side of the board here is going to be the stuff we're going to be using to plug it in. and then you just have to remember if you have common denominator, do that. If you have to FOIL something, you have to remember FOIL, so forth and so on. I'll do one more just to make sure we got it. Because basically, the only way you can get these is if you work them, because it's like a puzzle, each one's going to work differently. You're just using the stuff on the left and trying to pull it together to you on the right. So it's like a puzzle. If you actually try and get into it, these are actually kind of fun because they are like a puzzle, but you actually have to kind of work them, and there's no way I can do every one of them for you because they're probably going to work differently. I'll do one more. We'll try number 17. We'll do 18. I'll do 18. So this will be 18. So 18 is cosine of x plus sine of x squared plus cosine of x minus sine of x squared equals 2. So that's the problem. Alright? So the first thing I want to do is basically figure out what each of these are. And so I actually have to do the operation. Now, it's cosine of x plus sine of x squared, and so this is like algebra where we have to FOIL. We're going to have to FOIL that out. And so it's really cosine of x plus sine of x times cosine of x plus sine of x. And then we have to FOIL. And so when I FOIL this, you're going to end up with cosine times cosine, which is cosine squared of x. Then I'm going to do cosine times sine, which would be plus cosine of x sine of x. It's just what they are. You can't combine them, so you just combine them with multiplication. Then I'm going to do sine of x plus cosine of x, which would be cosine of x sine of x again. Then I'm going to do sine times sine, which would be plus sine squared of x. And so that's just FOILing, just instead of using variables, it's dealing with cosines. So notice your middle term is going to combine, and so this is really going to combine, these two middle ones are going to combine, and just to save room on the board, I'm going to erase that and combine them. But cosine of x, sine of x, plus cosine of x, sine of x, is going to be 2 cosine sines of x's. So that would be 2 cosine of x, sine of x. And then, of course, your sine squared of x. Okay, so that was the first one. The second one's going to work exactly the same way. I'm going to have to FOIL that. So it's going to be cosine of x minus sine of x times cosine of x minus sine of x. So again, FOILing it, I have cosine times cosine, which would be plus cosine squared of x. Then I have cosine times sine, negative sine, which would be a negative cosine of x, sine of x. Then I have a negative sine times a positive cosine, which would be negative cosine of x, sine of x. And then I have a negative sine of x times a negative sine of x, which will be a plus sine of x squared. So again, this is just straight FOILing. Okay, again, the middle terms are going to combine since we FOILed. I'm going to erase it so to save a little bit of room on the board. But notice you're going to have a negative cosine of x, sine of x, and then another negative cosine of x, sine of x. So those are going to combine to a negative 2 cosine of x, sine of x. And then plus sine squared. Alright, so now I can just try to clean all this up. Notice the 2 cosine of x, sine of x, and the negative 2 sine of x, cosine of x are going to cancel. Alright, so that'll just leave me cosine squared of x plus sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x plus sine squared of x equals 2. Alright, remember sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. So this goes to 1. This goes to 1 as well. And so we get 1 plus 1 equals 2. And so that would prove it out. And so again, we're just using algebra and all this stuff on the left to then prove that the left is to the right. And so that's really all you're going to do. Each one's going to work differently, so I can't really anticipate. I'd have to work all the homework to anticipate all the issues you may have with it, because every problem's going to work differently. This left side of the board is basically your toolbox, and so each problem's going to work differently, but you're still going to be pulling out of the same toolbox. And then using your algebra skills, so you may have to FOIL, you may have to get a common denominator, things like that, but that's pretty much the lesson. And so again, if you have any questions as you work through this, the best thing to do is to get up with me, and I can kind of help you through each step to kind of see where you're at, but that's the lesson. And so if you have any questions, again, get up with me, but that's pretty much all we'll do today. So the homework is going to be page 603, and it's going to be 1 through 20. So page 603, 1 through 20, and I hope y'all have a good day.